a video explaining the events of the 1798 rebellion in Ireland. So, of course, this rebellion was born out of and inspired by the American Revolution of 1776 and the French Revolution of 1789. Those events and their, laudable ideas of democracy and liberty and the end of oppressive policies and of government led to an organisation in Ireland called the United Irishmen. Notable members were Wolfe Tone, Lord Edward Fitzgerald, and Napper Tandy. Interestingly, all three of whom were Protestants. Well, certainly Wolfe Tone and Edward Fitzgerald were. Wolfe Tone and Edward Fitzgerald were from, very elite Protestant families, and essentially what they felt was that Ireland was not being treated fairly, and that they wanted to unite the different elements of Irish society, the Catholics, the Protestants, the rich and the poor, as one organisation to rid Ireland of British rule, so that Ireland would become a fairer society. Nice idea, didn't work. As I said, inspired by the French and American revolutions, and their aims were to end religious division between Catholics and Protestants, to rid Ireland of English rule, and they were republicans. They wanted to create an Irish republic, which meant no king, which meant democratic elections, and which meant that every citizen would be entitled at birth to rights that they were not entitled to under a monarchy. As background, it's very important to understand what the penal laws were. So these, if you look at that word penal, the word penalty comes from it, so designed to punish. So in Ireland in the 1800s, in the 18th century, the 1700s, there was a series of laws which essentially punished you if you were not a member of the official Church of Ireland. Now that included most of the population who were Catholic, and a large portion of the Protestant population who were what were known as dissenters. So Presbyterians, Methodists, anybody who didn't agree with the teachings of the official church, to not agree with is to dissent. They were punished by these penal laws, and it led to a real sense of unfairness and injustice, and it led to all of the wealth and all the power being in the hands of a very, very, very small number of very powerful, very rich men, known as the Protestant ascendancy. If you go around, I live in Dublin. You go around Dublin, you go to places like Castletown House in Selbridge, or Carton House, which is just outside Dublin, down near Maynooth, or up into Wicklow to Powerscourt House. You'll see the unbelievable amount of wealth that was in the hands of a very small number of people who had all of the land handed to them by the government because they were loyal, and they essentially collected rents and taxes from their tenants, making them really, really rich. That meant that a lot of people felt that Irish society was unfair. We did have a parliament. It was known as Grattan's Parliament, but you could only be elected as a member of that parliament if you were, male, and again, a member of the official church. So it was entirely unrepresentative and, didn't get much done. So originally there was an aim to have a revolution in 1796. There was cooperation with the French, who were at war with Britain at the time, and had just had their own revolution. And the French were supposed to send an army to, help the Irish rebels. But there was a disaster at Bantry Bay with the French expedition, and that led to the cancellation of the planned rebellion in 1796. Once it became clear that a rebellion had been planned but had to be aborted, the government, had this, really, really, really vicious crackdown on potential rebels or traitors. So rebels were arrested, leaders were arrested, others had to flee the country or go into hiding. A yeomanry, which was essentially a volunteer army of people loyal to the king, was established in every county in Ireland and went around the place trying to find United Irishmen and using terror tactics to punish them or to frighten them into staying away from rebellion. That included things like pitch capping, which is really an extraordinary act where pitch is like tar, which is hot and sticky, and they pour the pitch over the head of the victim using a kind of a metallic bowl, and then wait until it hardened, sticking to the skin and the scalp, and then they tear it off, essentially scalping the victim, leading to horrendous pain, suffering, and often death because of infection. And this was the message was, if you're a United Irishman, if you're acting against the king, this is what you're going to get. So it really did lead to a unbelievable terror in the country, and the lack of, or sorry, the fact that a lot of people who would have otherwise become involved in the rising when it did happen didn't get involved, understandably. So anyway, they decided to go ahead with the rising in 1798, and it was a disaster. And it was mainly a disaster because it was not coordinated. It was not coordinated. So you had these different kind of risings all over the country, none of which was very strong, and each one of which was easy to suppress or put down, because the British could focus all their forces in this one area. Had Ulster, had Dublin, had Wexford, had Galway, had they all risen at the same time, it probably would have been much more effective. We don't really know. The fact is it didn't. Fitzgerald was arrested in Dublin on the 19th of May. He was one of the main leaders. 27th of May, the rising in Wexford occurred, which quickly disintegrated into kind of sectarian bloodshed. The massacre at Bulla Vogue being an example of that. By 21st of June, the Wexford rebels were, slaughtered at Vinegar Hill. And then in Ulster, Henry Joy McCracken led a rising, which again was crushed in June. So it was a disaster. And in particular, sorry, I said Bulla Vogue. Bulla Vogue was a battle. Sculla Vogue is where I was thinking of. My apologies for those of you teachers who are listening to this and giving out about me and my inaccuracies. If it's any consolation, this is my 15th one of these I'm doing today, so apologies if I'm getting things mixed up. And kind of, I suppose, the longest lasting legacy of 1798 is definitely the Act of Union, which occurred in, I'll come to that in a second, in the 1800s, the early 1800s. But there's no doubt whatsoever that any chance of uniting Irishmen in a sense of kind of fellowship as, fellow citizens, regardless of their religion, was really killed in the sectarian violence that occurred in 1798, particularly in Wexford. It happened in lots of places, but famously in Wexford. There were these kind of tit for tat killings, and Carnew and Dunlavin Green on the 25th and the 26th of May, scores of United Irishmen were executed. Then on the 5th of June, there's a kind of a revenge for this. 200 Protestants were murdered at Sculla Vogue. And then famously at Wexford Bridge, 93 Protestants were rounded up and killed with pikes. And this led to this kind of sense amongst the Protestant community that they were never going to be safe living in a Catholic-dominated Ireland. So they didn't want, Irish independence. Not everybody, but many of, the members of the Protestant population who would have seen themselves as being pro-Irish independence. That changed following the sectarian violence in Wexford. So it ended in 12th of October 1798 when the French fleet, which was meant to have come, look, it's October, bloody thing started in May, came way too late. It was intercepted at Lochswilly and Donegal. Tone was amongst the people who landed, and he was arrested. It was an utter failure due to poor organisation, the failure of the French to send help in a timely fashion, the fact there were loads of informers who were telling the British everything that was going to happen, the actions of the yeomanry and the militia, which crushed a lot of local support for the United Irishmen, and the sectarian violence which divided the United Irishmen amongst themselves. If you were asked to write a paragraph on the consequences of the 1798 rebellion, I think really importantly, it heightened sectarian division between Protestants and Catholics in Ireland, especially in Ulster, but nationally. Led directly to the founding of the Orange Order, which is this organisation designed to promote Protestant culture and identity, which again is laudable, but had the effect of deepening the divisions between Catholics and Protestants. The Irish Parliament in Dublin, which was powerless anyway, but at least we had our own Parliament, was closed. And the Act of Union became law on the 1st of January 1801, which made Ireland part of the United Kingdom of Britain and Ireland, and closed down the Irish Parliament, meaning that all Irish members of Parliament had to travel to Westminster, which had an unbelievably negative impact on the governance of this island for the next 100 years or so, and led, of course, to, didn't lead to the famine, but certainly to the mismanagement of the famine, hugely contributed to that, and consequently Home Rule, and really everything that's happened since then can be traced back to the Act of Union, and the Act of Union definitely wouldn't have happened had the 1798 rebellion not happened. So I hope you found that a useful revision.